Hello and welcome to Answering Bart Ehrman, episode 10, our special episode, where we're going to not look at his book this time, but instead look at one of his popular videos online. So hello, Matthew.
Hi, Sam. How you going?
Good. So what's this video?
So this one's from the MythVision podcast, which is not one I heard before, but having a look at it, it's somebody interviewing Bart Ehrman about his favorite three reasons that the New Testament can't be trusted, his three best errors in the Bible, if you like. And so we should expect them to be really compelling and persuasive. Bart Ehrman does lots of these sorts of interviews giving these kinds of examples, and this is a popular one. So we'll get into it and see what we think.
All right. Well, I'm going to add the video here. Here we go.
Great.
I want to talk about 3 to 5 of your favorite contradictions. They're all subjective. This is your decision, and we'll just start with one and work from there. I'd like to pick 3 to 5 major contradictions in the New Testament that you really enjoy.
Okay, I'll tell you, first one I'll tell you is the one that made me realize that that the Bible's not inerrant. If people have read my stuff, they might have heard this one. But in Mark chapter 2, so let me just say, I was a fundamentalist. I thought there was no mistakes in the Bible of any kind, no contradictions. I could explain anything. And so like fundamentalists today still can. And so in Mark chapter 2, Jesus' disciples are going through the fields of grain. It's a Sabbath. They're hungry. They peel off some grain. They start eating it. And the Pharisees see them doing it. I guess Pharisees are in every corner in Galilee watching to see if people are eating grain on the Sabbath. They're doing it. And the Pharisees get really upset. And they say, Jesus, your disciples are harvesting grain on the Sabbath. You can't do that. And tell them to stop. And Jesus says, look, don't you remember what King David did when Abiathar was the high priest? He went into the temple and ate the showbread with his people, with his men, because they were hungry, even though only the priests are supposed to eat it. Sabbath was made for humans, not humans for the Sabbath. And so you have the story. So I had this class at Princeton Seminary, a Greek interpretation of Mark. My first semester is like we studied Mark in Greek, and at the end, we had to write a term paper. I wrote a term paper on this passage because this passage says that this took place in the Old Testament when Abiathar was the high priest. But the Old Testament says that it took place when Ahimelech was the high priest, Abiathar's father. So I wrote a 30-page paper arguing that, in fact, even though it says that Abiathar was the high priest, it means that Ahimelech was the high priest. It's a very complicated argument, and with the grammar of the Greek and style, so 30 pages later, boom, it really was Ahimelech, and Jesus knew it. So at the end, my teacher was very pious and very devout Christian, but he wasn't a fundamentalist, but he was a very devout Christian. And he liked my paper, gave me an A on the paper. But then at the bottom, he said, maybe Mark just made a mistake. And I thought, that would be easier than a 30-page paper that's dancing around the problem. Yeah, okay. So once I realized that, it opened the floodgate. After that, I started.
Okay, so there's the first part of the video that we're looking at today. So what is Bart Ehrman's problem?
Yeah, I was struck, Sam. I think you as well had the experience for the first semester of theological college. We studied Mark's Gospel in Greek as well. It seems to be the first year book to do. Anyway, so familiar with what he's talking about in terms of engaging Mark in the original Greek. Couldn't help but notice, I don't know you noticed too, Sam, kind of a cheap shot on the way through about, there must be Pharisees on every corner. Just trying to make it seem like a ridiculous situation that there were Pharisees.
Well, hang on, let's have a look at that.
Around to spot what Jesus disciples
so he's saying, there's Pharisees everywhere. But just have a look at this. There were Pharisees amongst the early Christians. The Pharisees were a major group within Israel. But some believers, this is talking about the Christians, some believers who belonged to the party of the Pharisees. So this is within early Christianity, there was a group of Pharisees. So why couldn't there be followers? Why couldn't there be Pharisees around Jesus and his disciples? There's absolutely no reason. So it's a cheap shot, but there's nothing to it. I mean, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, I mean, we know there were Pharisees around that could have been around that particular moment, so there's nothing implausible about that. He's trying to make it sound ridiculous, but it's not. But the main thing that he raises is that Mark chapter 2, Jesus tells a story where Abiathar is the high priest in the Old Testament, a particular incident. But the Old Testament itself says that Ahimelech, his father, was the high priest at that time.
All right, well, let's have a look at that.
Says is the case, and I want to read his 30-page paper explaining it, because I'm not sure what he wrote about, but go ahead.
Yeah, so this is his number one contradiction that got him rethinking everything about the Bible, and he wrote a 30-page article on it. I mean, you heard it yourself, everyone, right? This is the big one. So let's have a look. And the Pharisees were saying to him, "Look, why are they doing what is not lawful on the Sabbath?" And then he said to them, "Have you never read what David did when he was in need and was hungry, he and those who were with him, how he entered the house of God at the time of Abiathar, the high priest, and ate the bread of the presence, which is not lawful for any but the priest to eat, and also gave it to those who were with him." So he's absolutely right. Mark does say that Abiathar was high priest. Yeah. And then Bart Ehrman goes on to say, but the Old Testament says Ahimelech was high priest. Well, guess what? I went back and looked in the Old Testament, and it never says Ahimelech was high priest. Let's have a look at this. So in 1 Samuel 21, so the book of 1 Samuel is where we see Ahimelech and Abiathar. And in chapter 21, we read about, it says here, and David said to Ahimelech, the priest. It doesn't say that he's the high priest. It just says he's the priest. And Abiathar, who Bart Ehrman is referring to in Mark chapter 2, is also called the priest. So there's no high priest even mentioned in the book of 1 Samuel. So he's just wrong to say the Old Testament says Ahimelech was high priest and Abiathar wasn't. They're both just simply called priests. Now, I want to add something to this, because what we find is that the priesthood, the high priesthood, could rotate between members of the high priestly family as need had. For instance, if a high priest became unclean, if the high priest was sick, if he had to travel, then he wasn't able to do his duties, and so other members of his family could do this. And we actually see this in the New Testament itself, where several people are called high priest, all from the one high priestly family. So I'll just do this quickly. First, they led Jesus to Annas. So this is speaking about Jesus' trial. First, they led him to Annas, for he was the father-in-law of Caiaphas, who was high priest that year. So Caiaphas is high priest that year. It was Caiaphas who had advised the Jews that it would be expedient that one man should die for the people. Simon Peter followed Jesus, and so did the other disciple. Since that disciple was known to the high priest, he entered with Jesus into the courtyard of the high priest. Now, whose courtyard are they going into? Well, it's Annas. They're going into Annas's courtyard. And so we see that Annas is also the high priest, and we actually see this in the book of Acts. This is talking about the disciples now in Jerusalem. On the next day, their rulers and elders and scribes gathered together in Jerusalem with Annas, the high priest, and Caiaphas and John and Alexander, and all who were of the high priestly family. So I just want to point out here that there's absolutely no contradiction at all. And if Bart Ehrman had just taken the time to see how the high priestly office is within a family and can go from father to son at different times, then he would have got an answer to his question. So this is meant to be the big contradiction, and there's simply nothing there apart from not having read not having read the Bible on the subject.
It's a very shallow objection, isn't it? That the who is presently the high priest is just a little bit more complicated than one person holding it until they die. Yeah. And
absolutely nothing there. Let's keep moving. We'll look at the video for his second point.
sorts of contradictions. And the thing is that sometimes they're big and sometimes they're little. But if somebody's a fundamentalist, the big ones don't bother you because you can explain those away. Those are easy. It's the little ones that you think, oh, God, how do you do that? For example, here's another favorite one of mine. In the Gospel of Mark, I think it's chapter 5, there's a man who's a leader of a synagogue whose daughter has gotten sick. And he comes up to Jesus and he says to Jesus, my daughter's sick, and could you come heal her because she's going to die? And Jesus says, okay. So Jesus starts going to his house, and before he can get there, he gets interrupted. Another thing happens. Somebody bothers, and he has to deal with this other thing. And by this time, the man's daughter's died. So he gets there, and it's too late. She's dead. I'm too late. Jesus says, don't worry about it. I'll heal her. And so he goes into the room. She's dead. And he raises her from the dead. That's Mark's gospel. Matthew's gospel says that what happened is, this guy's name was Jairus, by the way. His name is Jairus. So this is the story of Jairus' daughter, Jairus. And so in Matthew, it says, this man Jairus comes up to Jesus and he says, my daughter has just died. Can you do anything about it? In Mark's gospel, she wasn't dead yet. The whole point is she wasn't deed yet. But right. In Matthew, she comes up, my daughter died. Can you do? So Jesus goes and he raises her from the dead. Okay, but it's like, which was it? It couldn't be both. So when I was a graduate student, I started to leave my view of the inerrant.
Okay. So there's his second big point. So what's his problem here, Matthew?
Yeah, well, he's comparing two gospel accounts. There's 4 different gospels, so it's fair enough to compare the way that they report the incidents that occur in them. It's the same incident in Mark 5 and Matthew 9, and Mark says that Jairus comes and says that his daughter is sick to Jesus and please come and heal her, whereas Matthew says Jairus turns up and says to Jesus, she's died, come and raise her from the dead, please. In both cases, she's dead when he gets there, as he said, but that's the contradiction he's highlighting, or alleged contradiction.
So what did Jairus say to Jesus?
Yeah, let's have a look at the Bible texts actually say, passages.
And when Jesus had crossed again, so this is in Mark, and when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side, a great crowd gathered about him, and he was beside the sea. Then came one of the rulers of the synagogue, Jairus by name, and seeing him, he fell at his feet and implored him earnestly, saying, my little daughter is at the point of death. Come and lay your hands on her that she may be made well and live. So he's saying that's what Jairus said there.
Yep.
Matthew 9, 18 and 19. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, my daughter has just died, but come and lay your hands on her and she will live. So yes, if you just look at those verses, that's what it's saying. That you've got Jairus saying one thing here and then a slightly different thing in Matthew. The first point I want to bring up, of course, is that there's huge agreements here, isn't there? They're both talking about the same location where Jesus is. They're both talking about the same series of events, and they're both talking about the same ruler who's coming for help for his daughter. So there's overwhelming agreement, right? What I found interesting, though, was that when I went and actually read Mark says a bit more than what Ehrman leads us to believe.
Yeah.
So I'll just read from the ... You see the little ... there?
Yeah.
Because this is what Mark continues to say. While he was still speaking, there came from the ruler's house some who said, your daughter is dead. Why trouble the teacher any further? But overhearing what they said, Jesus said to the ruler of the synagogue, do not fear, only believe. So when you read all of what Mark says, what you see is that Jairus has an extended conversation with Jesus. He does come saying, my daughter is ill, but that conversation ends with Jairus saying, my daughter is dead. And if you just, if Ehrman had just continued to read the rest of Mark, he would have seen that this conversation with Jesus and Jairus actually ends precisely the way that Matthew says the conversation was. That, because as you can see, Matthew gives a very short version. It's a much shorter. And so he just gives, the final part of the conversation, that the daughter has died.
Yeah, and just like as we all know, just from ordinary conversation and recounting incidents that have happened to us or to others, depending on context, we might give the longer version of the story or the shorter version, depending on the occasion.
Yeah.
And the Bible was the same thing. There's nothing mysterious or contradictory about that. It's entirely appropriate, but it's just Mark's given more detail, given the longer version, and Matthew has given the summary version. And both of them have portrayed things truthfully, accurately.
Yeah, and both of the point is, when Jairus comes, in both conversations, he says that his daughter's died. That's the point. Right. But if you only look at the first part, then you don't get all of it.
Yeah.
So you get this feeling that he's reading the Bible hoping that there's an error somewhere. I hope I can find something.
If you hope hard enough, you'll tend to find something even if it's not there.
Yeah. So let's go now to the final part. So I will get it up and then scroll down to where we need to go. I think it's at 8 minutes 30.
It was infallible.
So let me just go down here to 8 minutes 30.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's see what he says here.
So we give our talks, and Mike does his thing, I do my thing. And afterwards, the moderator gets up, who's also a conservative evangelical, and he says, okay, so the four of you, I've got a question. I want you all to answer this. In Mark's gospel, Jesus sends out the disciples on his mission during his ministry to go out and heal the sick and cast out demons. And he says to them, don't take a backpack, don't take extra sandals, don't take any money, don't take a staff, just go. And so there you go. In Matthew's gospel, same episode, Jesus sends them out, go heal the sick, raise the dead, or cast out demons, and don't take a backpack, don't take extra sandals, don't take any extra money, and take a staff. Just the opposite of what Mark says.
Mm-hmm.
So the moderator says, okay,
I think we'll leave that there. That's enough. So this is his final contradiction. What is he's been asked for the big three. So what's this last one?
Yeah, so it's a Mark and Matthew's gospel comparison again. So in the middle of Jesus' ministry, he commissions his disciples to go out to the villages and basically to do ministry in Jesus' name. And he tells them what to take with them. They are in Mark to take a staff, and in Matthew they are not to take a staff, is what he's claimed.
That's his claim. So Mark says take a staff, Matthew says don't take a staff. So let's get this up.
Have a look at the passage. Yep.
Hang on. So I better remove that. Add that. Okay, so here it is. He charged them to take nothing for their journey except a staff, no bread, no bag, no money for their belts, but to wear sandals and not to put on 2 tunics.
Mm-hmm.
And then in Matthew 10, acquire no gold or silver or copper for your belts, no bag for your journey, or 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, for the laborer deserves his food. Now, the first point as I want to bring up before is there's overwhelming agreement in terms of the location, in terms of the mission that he's calling them to do, in terms of who Jesus is speaking to. So that even the items that he's referring to, there's overwhelming agreement here.
Yeah.
But Ehrman saying, Mark says to take just a staff,
mm-hmm.
whereas in Matthew he's saying no staff. So what do you think?
Yeah, well, they're both the same point is made in different words in each occasion, and so on the surface it could seem like there is a contradiction there. Both of them make the same point though, which is go as you are, don't bring anything with you except the stuff you've got on. That is,
yes.
You don't bring extra money, you bring the staff you've got in your hand, you bring the shoes you're wearing, you don't pack an extra tunic, you just go. And both of the passages say exactly that in different ways. The second one, the Matthew's Gospel one, has a little bit of ambiguity in the phrasing in Greek. So it says 2 tunics or sandals or a staff. the 2 applies to all 3 items: tunics, sandals, staff.
Yeah.
Don't bring extra sandals. Don't bring extra tunics. Don't bring an extra staff.
Yes.
It's actually not saying don't bring a staff at all. It's just saying don't bring an extra one. Go as you are.
Yeah, exactly. The fact that he's saying don't bring 2 tunics or sandals or a staff, it's all in the Greek. It's all just one phrase. He's just saying don't bring extra. So,
and you get that from the English as well. Like the point's the same in both passages. Yeah. He's picked on a very small detail and said, "Oh, look at this really important contradiction," which isn't a contradiction, but missing the main point and the overwhelming agreement, which you highlighted before.
And you can see that he's talking about not taking extra because he's not expecting them to go barefoot. He's saying don't take 2 tunics or sandals. He's not saying go barefoot, right? He's just saying don't take, right? He's just saying don't. No, so this is in Matthew. He's saying don't take 2 tunics or sandals. Now, that doesn't mean don't take any sandals. It just means don't go, he's not saying don't go barefoot. He's saying you don't need extra sandals. You don't need an extra staff. So,
and that's important to highlight because Ehrman's reading of it, what he's just pointed out, he's claiming that Matthew says don't wear shoes, don't wear anything on your feet, which clearly he's not saying.
He's not saying that. Again, it's this whole way of reading the Bible of I want to find contradictions here.
Yeah.
Right. And they're not here. Everything we've looked at today, there's no contradiction in any of these things if you just take the time to read them. Anyway, look, we'll finish up there for today. That was the end of our special. And as we said, every 10 episodes, we're going to give you a special on some topic. And that's it for today. So thanks, Matthew. Thanks, everyone, for watching. And we'll see you for episode 11 next week.
Thanks, Sam.
Bye.